Hi, 7th and 8th. We are continuing on chapter 23. Now, last time we talked together, we were talking about a group of terrorists in Iran seizing 6 Americans and holding them hostage. And Ronald Reagan, our president at the time, was trying to come up with a way to release them without having to start another world war. And that's where we're kind of going back a little bit over those first couple of notes just so we can get our feet wet to understand what we're getting into today. So let's talk about that. Let's start with 1986. A group of terrorists supported by Iran seized 6 Americans in Lebanon, held them hostage. You should already have this note, so I'm going to go over it really quick. Then Reagan agreed to sell some arms to the Iranians if they would help release the hostages. So here is what's going on here. You've got a group of terrorists supported by Iran holding hostages. Reagan is agreeing to sell. He's just opening the market to sell guns and other arms to the Iranian government if they in turn would help release the hostages. He's trying to get the government of Iran to take care of this issue from inside. The Central Intelligence Agency, and remember that the vice president under Reagan was a former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, so he would have had a lot of insight and background as to exactly how to go about this. They arranged to use the proceeds from that gun sale. It wasn't just giving guns, it was selling guns to support the Contra freedom fighters in Nicaragua. The Contra freedom fighters were fighting against communist takeover in Nicaragua. At the same time that this was going on, while Reagan is trying to make this deal, the United States Congress had decided independently to negotiate a peace settlement with the communists in Nicaragua. And they in turn outlawed all help to the Contras. Now, this is going to cause a huge conflict because Congress is going to basically tell the president, you can't help those who are fighting against this communist aggression in Nicaragua at all. We're not going to allow that to happen. This goes directly against anything the United States government has ever been a proponent of before. Always before, the presidents and the Congress have always been trying to stamp out communism or try to help people who were being threatened with communism. This is really the first time when our Congress has flat out said, no, we're going to help the communists in this case, and not those who are trying to rescue their country from communism. So that's what Congress had decided. The president disagreed, and most of Americans disagreed with this statement. But president is not going to stop his sale of arms to the Iranian government to get the money to help the Contras. He's not going to stop. He's just going to continue it on, but he's not going to ask permission of the Congress. And so it's going to be seen as a secret negotiation. And in fact, it was a secret negotiation. He didn't want to have to deal with Congress. But here's the rub. Congress and the president are of equal rank. Okay, when we talk about their equal rank, okay, when we talk about the 3 branches of government, we have the Congress, which is the lawmaking branch, the legislative branch. We have the executive branch, that's the president and all of his people who work for him. He's also one of the smallest branches. He is supposed to sign bills into law, and he's supposed to enforce the laws. And then we have the judicial branch, which has right now 9 justices, and they go through all the laws and they make sure that those laws will be covered by the Constitution. They make sure that those laws are constitutional. I was trying to say something else there and I lost my train of thought. Sorry. So the Justice Department is actually quite large because it not only covers the Supreme Court, it covers all federal courts. The executive branch is actually really kind of small overall. There are a lot of people who work in the executive branch, but there's just a few departments. So we have the president saying, I'm not going to follow the guidelines of the Congress. The Congress is saying we are not going to support the president in his attempt to free these hostages and then sell arms to or send money to the Nicaraguan people who are trying to get rid of communism. So we really had an impasse between these two groups, and they're going to be fighting against each other. The executive branch and the legislative branch are going to be fighting against each other about which is the right path to take. Now, still concerned about communist threat in Nicaragua, Colonel Oliver North and others arranged for a transfer of Iranian funds to the Contras. They just continued with the original deal. But by this time, the president, because he was the head of the executive branch and he didn't want to be fighting directly against Congress, he basically gave the go-ahead and then said, just don't tell me anything else about it. Even though everything was already in play, it was already in place, everybody already knew what they were planning to do. But this is where it starts getting really, really sticky, because the Colonel North, and his staff tried to keep it really as a state secret. And so did the president. So there's going to be some serious allegations being thrown around here where people are going to be saying, okay, well, did the president break the law? And that's going to become the biggest question. Now, in order to find out if the law was actually broken, there were what we call the Iran-Contra hearings. In 1987, they investigated these events, and the people who investigated were going to be the Congress, the people in Congress, the people who said, we are not going to support the Contras. So they're going to be the ones investigating, which is also going to bring up a point of contention among the American people. Is it fair that Congress is investigating someone who disagreed with them? That's going to be called into play. But here's what's going on. The Congressional Investigating Committee said that Oliver North had violated the law, but later court trials failed to convict him. So they said, we've done our investigation. We've decided, yes, you did break the law. But then when he went to actual judicial courts, they said, no, there's not enough evidence here to say that this person committed this crime. Okay, Mikhail Gorbachev, the new Soviet leader, met with President Reagan in Switzerland and Iceland to discuss a mutual limitation of nuclear arms. This is the third time we've heard this. Okay, let's all get together. Let's just plan not to make as many nuclear weapons as, we can. Let's agree that we're both going to slow it down. So why do we keep repeating this? Because there's always hope. Okay. Some people say, you do the same thing over and over again, you expect a different result. That's the definition of insanity. When it comes to world leadership, and the leadership is always changing, there's always hope that maybe this time we have leaders who are smart enough to figure out how to do this. But honestly, it's always been an issue. It's the same thing over and over again. And this is the same argument that people use for socialism, communism. Maybe this time it'll be better. And yet there doesn't seem any way around getting out of this. Do I personally agree with this? No. I think it's kind of silly to kind of, tie yourself to a leader that you don't 100% agree with, or at least 90% agree with. But they're going to meet in Switzerland, Iceland. They're going to discuss a mutual limitation of nuclear arms. And they did sign the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, or the INF Treaty, in 1987. In the 80s, things were going really, really well for the United States. We were tops in medical technology, computer technology. There was a lot of disposable income. Cable was all over the United States, so people had 50 to 75 stations they could watch news with. Cable news network became a thing. That's CNN. MTV became a thing, and they had a huge news department. I know it's hard to believe, but MTV, back in when it was first came on the air, they really had like a dozen music videos, and then they also had every hour they had a news break, just like on radio does. Radio will have like an hour long, not hour long, but every hour on the hour they'll do a news break. MTV got involved with that too. And MTV was pretty much just music and a little bit of news, music and a little bit of news. But here is the thing. When people are doing really, really well, there are always going to be people in the United States who find that boring. And the number one group in the United States who find America doing well boring is going to be the news media, because they need some kind of shock to get ratings. And so they really pushed for, oh, look at this. I mean, yeah, Reagan is signing this, but I mean, there's a possibility that nuclear war could happen at any moment. And because of this, Hollywood also gets involved. Okay. I'm just giving you the pattern here because I've seen this pattern repeated over and over again. When things are going well, that's when Hollywood, the news media, and the music industry all start pushing for this idea of it could all end like that. So you better beware. So in the 80s, what we started seeing was a lot of movies about at any time a nuclear attack could happen. There was even a mini series about a nuclear attack happening and what it actually does to the human body. There was absolutely really no threat of a nuclear attack happening, but it was being pushed as if it was imminent. There was going to be a threat. And MTV got on board with this, and they were pushing this whole idea of, what would happen if the United States and the Russians didn't get along. And musicians who are very tied into that industry, they're tied in with Hollywood and news, they wrote a lot of songs about what would happen if there was a nuclear attack. Sting, who was one of the founding members of the Police, wrote a song called what if the Russians love their children too? The idea that maybe we should be looking at the humanity of people instead of trying to threaten to blow each other up. But here's the thing. There was no threat. It was all manufactured to sell things. The threat was used to get people to watch the news. The threat was used to get people to watch the movies, to watch the television shows, and to buy the albums, and to watch the music videos. It was a manufactured threat. And it just went on and on and on. And in the meantime, the people who are at the same time saying that they're worried about nuclear war are going to their local malls and buying $200 designer jackets. Doesn't really sound like people are that afraid, but they needed something to be concerned about, or else they would look shallow. 1987, the United States celebrated its 200 years of constitutional rule. Now, we already talked about the bicentennial, but in 1987, it was the 200th year of the Constitution being written. Okay, there's a difference there. We became a nation long before we had a constitution. We'd become a nation with the Declaration of Independence, then we'd fought a major war, and then we became a confederacy for a time. That means that the states basically told the central government what to do. And when that turned out to be a disaster, the people from each state got together in Philadelphia, and they basically threw out the Articles of Confederation, which was our first official document. And they created instead the Constitution, which made us, instead of a confederacy, a federal republic, where the responsibilities of government would be split between state and the federal government, the central government. Okay? And so this was when we started celebrating our 200 years of constitutional rule. And the Constitution of the United States is one of the world's greatest documents. Except for additional amendments, it remains exactly the same as when it was penned by our founding fathers. We only have about, I think it's 27. I always forget. I don't know why. I teach it every year, and I always forget like how many exact amendments. Pretty sure it's 27. But just 27 changes in 200 years is a phenomenal record for any legal document to have. Okay. Now, although the Soviet Union tried its best to keep up with the United States, several obstacles stood in its way. And when we talk about them trying to keep up with the United States, it's primarily in military, but they also, especially in the 80s, were really pushing the idea that they were very culturally superior, that they had the best literature, they had the best dance troupes, the best music. They couldn't really get away with saying they had the best technology because everybody knew they didn't, but they were trying to keep up at least with the United States. Here are the obstacles that stand in their way. They have an inefficient system of government. Communism itself hinders progress because it gives people no incentive to work hard or to improve their skills. If you're told you're going to get the same grade in the class no matter what you do. If you walked in the beginning of the year and I told everybody in the class, you know what, we're just going to make sure everybody gets a B this year, no matter what you do, you're getting a B. Nobody would do their homework. Nobody would pay attention to lectures. Nobody would fill in the notes. No one at all would stay for tests. There's no point in doing it. There's no point in listening if you know you're guaranteed a grade. That's the whole thing. Now, that may seem a little silly, but there are a few public schools in our country who have a policy of not failing students. Students, they could show up to class and never turn in a piece of work and still pass the class with a D. It's a really bad grade, but they won't fail and they'll get passed on to the next class. So we're actually seeing that happening. I mean, that has always been like what if a teacher told you, but that's actually happened. There was a teacher this year made the news on the internet because she quit over the fact that teachers weren't allowed to fail students. And she wrote a little note on her whiteboard before she walked out. It wasn't at our school. Okay. I don't want you to get that confused. It was at a public school. And she wrote a note saying, I cannot in good conscience pass people who've never turned in a single assignment throughout the course of the year. There's nothing to grade if nobody turns in an assignment. When you don't turn in your assignments, I can't give you a grade. That's the way it works, which means that you have a choice. You can either leave our school or you can try and get the work done at a discounted grade. You're going to lose points for being late. Or you can just fail and then take summer school and lose all your free time. And then maybe even if you don't do it in summer school, repeat the year. So there are opportunities available for you if you choose not to do your work. But why would you do that? Do the work the first time, do it right, be more efficient, and enjoy your free time. A lot of students don't understand that when they don't do their work properly the first time, it ends up being something that they have to do over again, and it takes up more of their time, and it is less fun. Okay, so we're talking about communism here, but we can see how it kind of relates. So you have the people have little incentive to work hard or to improve their skills because there's no bonus for when they do well, and there's no punishment for when they do badly. So what's the point? Sorry, I got a plane going by. It's a beautiful spring day. I have my windows open. Not turning on my air yet. Sorry. Okay. The communist government also spends so much time and resources building weapons, it could not provide basic food, shelter, and clothing for its people. Here's the rub. Communism demands the right to provide people with basic food, shelter, and clothing. And then it very rarely delivers. You see, people are intelligent enough that if they're allowed to live in a free society, they can provide their own basic food, shelter, and clothing for themselves. Most of the people in the United States do this for themselves because we live in a freer society. So people know that they can go to work, make money, live in a house that is what they can afford. They can buy food that they can afford. They can buy clothing that they can afford, and they can provide that for themselves. So although powerful members of the Communist Party, and this is what we see all the time across the board in every communist and socialist society, this is true, the people who are in charge live a high standard of living, much higher than the people that they are supposed to be providing for. So the whole idea of taking out that top tier society, taking out that top 1%, or even the top 10%, or even if you look at Karl Marx's ideas, the top 30% of the people and redistribute their wealth, the people who are doing the redistributing tend to be very, very, very wealthy. They live a much higher standard of living than everybody else. And it's across the board. Every single socialist and communist nation does that. The communists also gave vast amounts of aid to terrorist groups around the world, and they created some severe financial problems within the Soviet Union. Instead of the money staying and allowing for the people to be taken care of, which is what they said they wanted to do. They said, you need to trust us that we will take care of you in a way that you deserve to be taken care of, and then people aren't being taken care of. That money is actually going outside the country to terrorist groups to create a sense of unease, so that those countries will be compelled to become communist, because the people will say, well, communism is promising us all this stuff. We want the stuff. Okay. So Ronald Reagan called Russia, or USSR, sorry, the evil empire. And it didn't go over well to people in the media because they thought he was being a little harsh. And he's like, I'm not being harsh. People in Russia are starving because they don't have food, while the money that they're supposed to be making is being sent to terrorist groups around the world. They're an evil empire, and that's it. Okay? But that evil empire began to collapse because they could not sustain themselves financially. They did not have a free economy, and the economy collapsed. So 1987, President Reagan visited the city of West Berlin. That's the free side, the free city. And he issued a challenge to Gorbachev, who was in control of East Berlin. And he said, Mr. Gorbachev, because there was a long speech that he did. And I'm actually going to read the one at the bottom. He says, yes, across Europe, this wall will fall. For it cannot withstand faith. It cannot withstand truth. The wall cannot withstand freedom. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. His other quote was, Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate, because he was at the Brandenburg Gate, which is the primary gate at the wall. And he said, open this gate, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And that resonated with a lot of people throughout the United States. Like, whoa, our president is showing strength. He's showing that he is serious about protecting those who are under communist rule, wanting to help them out of communist rule. And here's the thing about Gorbachev. A lot of people really liked him because he felt like a different kind of communist leader. He seemed to be wanting to make changes in the Communist Party, and Reagan recognized that and was really pushing him to go ahead and make those changes, to either disband communism or at least change it so that people would have at least a little bit of freedom, a little bit of room to breathe. Reagan knew that America's progress in the development of laser weaponry, and especially about the Strategic Defense Initiative, also SDI, a system of space-age weaponry designed to destroy enemy missiles, warheads, and flight. That's a fragment. That's great. Was really important. It should be at the end. Was really important. This is the Star Wars plan. It's not the movie, okay? But the Strategic Defense Initiative, that was kind of jokingly called the Star Wars plan. The purpose of this was quite simple. Have lasers attached to satellites in space. That way, if the USSR tried to shoot a missile over to the United States, it could actually be destroyed mid-flight by the lasers on those satellites. That's the plan. So the war would take place in the upper atmosphere and never actually have anything to do with what happens on Earth. It would actually stop everything before it could land on the United States, or if it was outside of our atmosphere, it would even burn up in the atmosphere. That was the whole plan of this laser weaponry Strategic Defense Initiative. Okay. So Reagan had equipped the American military with technological marvels that bankrupt Soviet economy could not match. And one of those was a stealth bomber, which was unreadable on radar because it was made out of different materials. So he is defending his defense. What he did was he put a lot more money into the military, knowing that we needed to protect ourselves from the Russians. Now, you ready for this? This is how twisted everything gets. Okay. There's no real threat between the United States and Russia. They signed an agreement that would keep both sides from building nuclear weapons. Reagan, keeping that agreement, does not build nuclear weapons. He builds defense weapons. He builds weapons and builds up the military to defend just in case there is ever an attack from outside, not just from Russia, but from any of the United States enemies. The media, who for years in the 80s has been pushing this idea that attack is imminent, the Russians are going to get us, the Russians are going to send nuclear weapons, we will end up under a nuclear attack, we will be like, the Russians, it's a good thing they love their children too, or they're going to bomb us and we're going to be in oblivion. Oh my goodness, MTV is... all the music videos are about nuclear war and nuclear weapons, 99 red balloons. Oh my goodness, what's going to happen if there's a nuclear attack? The news media is just all over this. What will people do if there's a nuclear attack? What are we going to do with the fallout and everything? Ronald Reagan creates a defense system. He is immediately attacked by the same people who were getting everybody ginned up, worked up, over the idea that there may be a military nuclear attack. They completely flipped. And instead of, oh, wow, okay, he listened to concerns from Hollywood, the news media, the music industry, and because those three had such a huge impact on American culture, the American people themselves, he started creating these weapons that would prevent nuclear attack. He started building up the United States military to prevent nuclear attack. And they completely turned on him and said, look at what he's doing. It's like he's just begging them to attack us. It's like, okay. So here's a little clue here. Nothing that any president does is ever going to be liked by anyone. And there will always be people who hate him no matter what he does, even if he's doing what they like, because they don't like his party. That's usually what it comes down to, if they don't like the person's party. But yeah, that happened. So desperate to save the Soviet Union from complete collapse, Mikhail Gorbachev is going to make some agreements that are going to make the Communist Party a little angry with him, because they're going to look at that as an admission of weakness. But here's the thing. The Communist Party was very weak at this time. Incredibly weak, actually. They were going bankrupt. They just were running out of everybody else's money. So this is what he agreed to get in good with the United States, because they were losing their ability to defend themselves or to attack. So he agreed to reduce Soviet weapons strength, not just nuclear weapons. He also agreed to free the enslaved nations of Eastern Europe. These Eastern European nations who were part of the USSR but never wanted to be, they kind of got swallowed up by the USSR after World War II. He would agree to stop encouraging revolution and bloodshed throughout the world. So he's going to stop paying for terrorists to attack others. So the United States and other free nations promised, in turn, to help the Soviet Union rebuild its economic and political system on a democratic free enterprise model. The USSR is going broke. They need desperately, they need influxes and injections of cash. So the free nations of the world are saying, we will help you rebuild into a free society if you would like to do that. And for the first time, we're going to hear a communist leader say, yeah, I could use the help. Now, they called that perestroika, which means restructuring. And they also called the idea of opening up the borders to other countries to come in and help them, glasnost. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little too late. Their bankruptcy has already taken effect, but they haven't told the rest of the world. This is the president of the USSR, the communist president of the USSR, doing a last-ditch effort to try to save whatever he can of his country. Okay, and we're actually going to stop there because we're going to get into a whole new subject in the next slide. So we're going to stop right there. I'll see you again tomorrow. Don't forget, tomorrow you also have literature lecture tomorrow because we're only doing Tuesdays and Thursdays now, just like we did at school. I also used to do Wednesdays because we had spelling tests, but I've stopped spelling tests for this year. You've got 3/4 of spelling tests under your belt. You really don't need the last quarter of spelling tests. And with everything that's going on, let's just not worry about that. Okay? So don't worry about spelling. It's over. So we're going back to the 2 days a week for literature. So Tuesday and Thursday is when we have our literature classes. And don't forget to do a little bit of homework every day for your history. You don't have to turn it in through email. You can just fill it out in your book. And when we are completely done with the book, then you can turn the whole thing in and I'll grade it for you. Record your grades and make sure you get your book back. Okay? So you have a really good day today. Do a little bit of homework right now. And I will talk to you for sure tomorrow.